Good morning and welcome to the Council Committee of the Whole of March 6th. As you will see, there is one item on our agenda for today. I'm going to call this meeting to order and move on to discussion items. Item 2.1, the police service transition financial question and answer. I will turn it over to Mr. Manuel for introduction. Mr. Manuel, let us know when appropriate timing for questions is, and then we'll go from there. Thanks so much. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor Clayton. So my understanding today is that following the February 21st Council Committee to hold a meeting where the municipal policing transition plan was presented by MNP, the city's third-party consultant, that upon receiving that in the subsequent 2 weeks that have followed, a number of questions have arisen in the community pertaining specifically to some of the financial analysis, and obviously a number of the line items within that report are rolled up. So there's some further clarity desired on behalf of council and community. So this morning is an opportunity to both discuss with administration as well as MNP, who I believe is online virtually, to address those specific questions.
Yeah, perfect, Mr. Manuel. Just so I can introduce who's online, or maybe if you want to, there's two representatives from MNP, Nathan Mertis, as well as Shartina, and I always forget how to pronounce your last name. I apologize. So MNP is online, and maybe you could introduce Lee as well. Thank you.
Certainly. So next to me is Mr. Lee Newton, who's our strategic projects manager, and our subject matter expert pertaining to the municipal police review. And as was also mentioned, later this evening, the principal partner for this project with MNP will be available at 6. Unfortunately, he had another commitment this morning that he wasn't able to adjust. But members of his team that were intimately involved in the financial aspects of this report are online.
Perfect. So Mr. Mertens and Ms. Horniak are online, just so council is aware. So yeah, Mr. Manuel, if you'd like to introduce sort of a high overview, are questions appropriate as we go? Do you have sort of timed in breaks? What would you prefer? So I would suggest at this point that I haven't really been given questions in ahead of time. So I think the best course of action is probably to identify, just jump into it and start answering questions, unless you would like me just to do an overall introduction. If you want to do an overview for introduction, I think that's valuable.
Okay, just give me 1 sec. I'm just going to pull up something for reference.
Yep. And council, so as you heard, if you want to prepare your questions, let's do one question, one counter, and then I'll move on to other people in the queue as we go. Thanks. No, sorry, we'll just do an introduction but jump in the queue.
Okay, so I'll start off with just an introduction as it pertains to the financials. So what you have in front of you is, or not in front of you, but what was presented on the February 21st CCW was the financial requirements associated with the 5-year startup and transition from the RCMP contract policing model to the municipal policing service model. Within that was a projected budget that saw that the cost of such a startup and transition would be $16,340,000 plus a suggested contingency up to $2.6 million. So those costs essentially include the transitional staffing, where there is a period of time where over those years there is duplicate staffing in place for key positions such as the chief of police and the recruitment and training teams, as well as some of the civilian support associated with that. Additionally, there's the cost of the police and equipment, fleet assets, technology, infrastructure, recruitment activities, training activities, and professional services. It is important to note that those costs do not rely on any additional revenue outside of what the city ordinarily receives or any additional automated traffic enforcement revenue. The costs were determined, and MNP can speak to this as well, but it was essentially an independent verification of cost, back-checked against known expenses. So a detailed costing, frankly down to the price of toques and tie clips on all aspects of policing expenditures, was assessed by the project team and third-party validated by MNP. These specific costs were determined following an analysis of both the current and future Grande Prairie policing expenditures, as well as expenditures at benchmark municipal police services. Where costing estimates needed further refinement, specific industries were approached for pricing.
Perfect. Thank you for that introduction. So Council, I'll open it up in the queue. As I mentioned, one question, one follow-up, and then I'll go to the next person. Recognizing Councillor Bressie to start.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Clayton. Something I'm trying to assess, as I'm just assessing the reasonableness of this financial model, is benchmarking against other municipal services is important to me. So how does the proposed financial model that we've come up with compare to similar services in other municipalities?
So I'll take that. So actually, during our current state analysis, one of the things that we did during that first report was take a look at Grande Prairie's policing cost per capita benchmarked against that of some of our municipal comparators we would use for mid-sized city policing. The two that we specifically singled out were Medicine Hat and Brandon, because they had similar complements of policing resources as to what the city of Grande Prairie has. In those cases, it was found that in 2021, the current state Grande Prairie policing expenditures had us at a per capita benchmark of $375, where Medicine Hat came in at $335, and Brandon came in at $295. So under both Medicine Hat and Brandon are municipal police services, where we are obviously a contract service, and in that particular instance, Grande Prairie's current cost exceeded that of those municipal services.
And sorry, it was $375 Grande Prairie, $335 Medicine Hat, $295 Brandon?
Correct.
Okay, and so then we're projecting that if we form a municipal service, it'll be slightly cheaper than RCMP, but not a whole lot. So if I'm understanding the numbers right, we're actually projecting, if we move forward this model, spend more per capita than those other two municipal police services.
We continue to spend more, yes. The intent of the municipal policing transition report that was received was not a cost savings exercise, but it was to essentially demonstrate what were the cost implications of providing municipal policing under its, comparing member to member, the same number of police officers, RCMP versus municipal, and under that modeling, it has come in slightly under what was projected to be the ongoing costs of the contract. And there is some room, as you indicated, for variance.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Bressie. I'll just check with the MMP. If you at any point want to add additional comments, just put your hand up. I'll keep an eye out for it as we go through the questions. Thanks. Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Clayton. I have a series of questions, so I'll go through the first one, I guess, now. And when I look at the report, we use a number of 104 FTEs on there. What I'm confused about is we actually only pay about 98. So I'm wondering, we paid 98 members, and that's kind of what's in the report, but when we show the data, we're showing at 104. So I'm just wondering why we're showing a number of 104 members when we're actually only paying for 98. And how we're using, I guess, behind the scenes, because we haven't seen the detail and the devil of the numbers, where those other 6 bodies went, I guess, and why we chose 104.
So historically, the city has directly funded up to the 104, and frankly, we're expected to fund the 104. In fairness to city finance, the RCMP have never been able to achieve the 104. We actually have 110 authorized positions, recognizing that there is transfers that impact when we have positions in the field. It's frankly, what occurs is there's an adjustment done at the end of the year where we are charged for the actual number of officers that the RCMP have in a full-time capacity on a year. And that's where that 98 comes from. They've never been able to get past the 98. Instead of having a massive budget surplus at the end of the year because we budgeted for 104 and ultimately only had 98, over the years, finance has adjusted that expectation that the 104 is not going to be achieved, and as such has adjusted financing accordingly. So at this point, what we did, the reason we used, say, 100 or 104 within the financial modeling of the report is essentially to show if we had the exact same number of municipal officers as we did RCMP officers, this is the cost differential. We could do that at 98, we could do it at 100, or we could do it at 104. That differential is going to be the same as a percentage. It's just that 104 is what our contract has us funding.
I guess the concern for me is what we're actually spending. And if we're actually only spending on 98, why are we using 104 in the model? Like, if we're trying to compare apples to apples of what it's costing us in 2021 versus moving forward, and we've ever only paid for 98, my fear is that we're using 104 in the model, and there's 6 bodies that aren't accounted for that makes the model look better than it is. And that's a concern I've had brought forward with me from a few residents, and I can't explain why we'd use 98 and what we actually write a check for. But on this, we're using 104 for what we're saying we're comparing it to.
So, Mr. Manuel, sorry, just when you're prepared, Mr. Martin had some context to add as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to pass that to Mr. Martin, but ultimately, we've assumed that there's the budget that's used in the comparison is for 100 RCMP officers against 100 municipal officers. So we know what the per member cost is on the RCMP side. So again, whether that's 98 municipal and 98 RCMP or 100 RCMP and 100 municipal, the cost differential will be the same. But Mr. Martins can maybe expand upon that.
Mr. Martins, go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. Just since it's my first time speaking, I'll just confirm that others can hear me.
Yeah, you bet.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and councillors. Just to add to Chris's comments there, I think just to clarify, there's, as Chris mentioned, 100 positions for the RCMP are compared to 100 positions for the municipal police service in the financial modeling. So in terms of comparing what the transition cost will look like, that cost is calculated based off of, or the difference of both the 18.9 million, the transition cost itself is based off of the difference between the 100 RCMP versus 100 of the municipal service. So going forward, there's room to, in practice, we have, as you mentioned, 98 RCMP in place. In practice, the municipal service will be targeting 100 to start, but in practice, you might have 98, you might have the full 100 complement just based off of where you are with your staffing turnover, and it's the same with the RCMP staffing. And those numbers can be adjusted based on where you decide that you want the number of officers to be in the end.
Sorry, we wrote a check for 98. It's in our financials as 98, and we're using 104. I appreciate it's a model of up and down, but in our 2022 budget, the number that we're going to show the public we spent is for 98 members, not 104, correct?
That is correct. The contract with the RCMP is for 104, and we get billed on a quarterly basis for 104. At the end of the year, the RCMP do a reconciliation on their fourth quarter billing that adjusts for their actual. We essentially don't have to pay for what they can't provide, and we get a check back. And our financial modeling through the city has encompassed that differential. That being said, as was just mentioned by Mr. Martins there, if the city's desire is to continue funding at 98, and that's the threshold for a future municipal police service, it can be set at 98.
I'll leave it. I'm really struggling with it. We paid for 98 and we're using 104 on a model. I don't know where the other 6 bodies go.
Because our expectation is to get 100.
But we're writing a check for 98. I just want to make sure we're not using the number moving across at what we're paying today, not and at 104. And from what I'm understanding, we're writing a check for 98. We're paying for 98. So we're not comparing apples to apples if we're using 98 and 104. And I'm not hearing much different. That's really clarifying that for me, to be honest.
Mr. Nicolay had a comment.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to clarify, the reason the 104 has to be included in the analysis and the reason why it's being referenced here is, should the RCMP staff up, they have the ability under the contract to bill us for 104 people. And so the typical average has only been 98. So over the years, the city's budget has adjusted so that we're not over collecting taxes, knowing that they're not going to get 104, they're not going to get 100. They're only going to get 98. So that's the reason why you're seeing 98, 100, and 104. The methodology used in the analysis, though, was to normalize for that. So what we're trying to determine is what's the differential between the same deployment of RCMP as we would use for a municipal police service, and that's where the 100 benchmark has come in. So the differential should be neutralized. If it goes to 98, the differential would be the same. Goes to 104, the differential would be the same.
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. I just want to clarify again those numbers you said. 335 for Grande Prairie.
375 per capita for Grande Prairie.
375. Thank you.
335 for Medicine Hat. 295 for Brandon. Medicine Hat and Brandon being both municipal forces.
I understand in your research that you visited the following communities: Surrey twice, Victoria, Delta, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Camrose, Brandon, Sault Ste. Marie, and Thunder Bay. Is that correct?
Mr. Newton? Or...
That's correct. Yes, we did.
Okay, and were you able to get...
I'm sorry, it's correction. We didn't go to Thunder Bay.
Okay.
North Bay.
North Bay.
North Bay, thank you. I thought I had one wrong, but that's fine. You clarified that. So I'm just wondering, were you able to get budgets and comparable numbers from all of those municipalities?
Mr. Newton, Mr. Manuel?
Yes, we did.
And we're in, regardless of the size, you've seen the numbers and we're not missing anything in our budget that will go bump in the night for us.
Maybe I'll turn that over to Mr. Martins for, a financial sort of estimation in regards to the potential of missing any numbers and comparables on the price per capita. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. Just to walk through a little bit of our methodology, and really we took 2 approaches, and the first being really a cost analysis from the ground up and building what all of the elements are based on our experience working across a number of police services in terms of what needs to be included in a budget. So as Mr. Manuel had mentioned earlier, we looked at a granular level of what all of those costs are for each of the categories, whether it's equipment or technology across the service, and built the costs from the ground up to what you can expect the transition costs to be, and included those in the budget. But then really to validate that and to add additional confidence to that analysis, we have looked at those other services that you mentioned, and in each of these categories in terms of what are others spending on technology, what are others spending in each of those categories, and looking at, are we in the right ballpark and does this make sense? And for each of those categories, we can say that yes, we have confidence and that the budgets are at the same scale, or sometimes even additional funds built in a conservative way, so that you are well in line with where other services are financially.
Okay, thank you. I'll follow up later. Thank you.
Anything to add for context? Thanks so much. Councillor Blackmore.
My question is, sorry, I have a terrible throat because I'm at that stage of cold where I sound like I'm dying, but I'm really perfectly fine. I have a follow-up question actually to Councillor O'Connor's. You did discuss ground-up analysis And I've had some comments from concerned citizens that we would be maybe taking shortcuts in the equipment we're supplying to a new police force. And I want you to assure me that what we're looking at is top of the line in every aspect, including perhaps paper clips.
Mr. Manuel?
So the equipment that is allocated within the startup and transition here will see the municipal police service, if it's going ahead, carry the very same level of equipment that progressive police services such as the Calgary Police, Edmonton Police, and frankly the RCMP deploy. There is certainly not projected to be any reduction of what the current RCMP contingent has available to them locally here in Grande Prairie. And actually, we built in enhancements to the level of equipment and tools available.
Thank you.
Good. Councillor Blackmore?
Yep, for now.
Okay. Councillor Bosch?
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. You know, some of these questions we've already asked you last time we did this, but I'm good with repetition. Gets it in there. My question to you is the $375 per capita and the $335, $295 in accordance to the other communities. What basis are we doing the $375 for that increase piece? What is the increased cost that others aren't paying for in those models?
So, Mr. Manuel, is there specific items in the differential between, in your cost evaluation, in the 375 comparable to the two municipal forces that you identified?
The simplest answer to that is the majority of expenditures, the exact numbers escaping me, but it's between 80 and 85% are salary related, which means essentially it's the complement of policing resources, not specifically police officers, because in Grande Prairie, there's been in Grande Prairie, we may have less police officers per capita, but the number of support staff supporting those, so total police personnel, including the civilian support staff, the peace officers, outreach workers, that's the collective cost of those resources. So ultimately, resourcing is the largest cost driver there.
So just for clarity, you're saying the collective cost is included in this 375, and that is higher than what Brandon or Medicine Hat is doing in regards to complementing their officers?
Simply put, we have more people per capita supporting policing operations in those municipalities.
And so to support that, that was a council choice.
Correct.
Yes.
And does this addition show an increase in wages compared to Brandon or Medicine Hat for RCMP?
Does the municipal
municipal policing?
Through the mayor, just to clarify, are we referring to, does a municipal police service show an increase in wages, or do the current wages exceed that of those municipal police services?
Sorry, I'll be clear. So I know you use the numbers in comparison with Edmonton Municipal Police Force. And that is, at this point in time, one of the highest ranked wage components or services through municipal policing. So I understand we use the Edmonton one. And is that higher than Medicine Hat and Brandon, basically, is what I'm asking?
So MMP can verify this, but ultimately what was done is, you're right, in an Alberta context, the Edmonton Police Service had the highest wages. The wages, their collective agreement expired in 2020. What MNP did was put in inflationary increase of 2% per year to bring us to 2023 rates, because the RCMP's collective agreement just expired. So with it essentially provided a 2023 rate projected on the municipal policing service against the RCMP's current rates. These Edmonton rates are higher than both Winnipeg and Medicine Hat.
Thank you.
Or Brandon, sorry.
Okay. So did anything to add, Mr. Martins, or are we good?
No, nothing to add. As Mr. Manuel mentioned, the cost escalation for inflation was added to the Edmonton rates. So we've projected higher rates than Edmonton officers currently receive in anticipation of them receiving inflationary increases.
I have a question on that vein, so I'm just going to jump in the queue. Mr. Manuel, you mentioned that previous councils made the decision to enhance the complement of administration for RCMP. The intent, as myself, O'Toole, were on that council, and Thiessen, the intent was so that more boots could be on the street, so that they had the administrative support. Tell me what the level of service, if a municipal police force is implemented, will look like in comparison. Maybe Mr. Newton, if you want to talk to the operations of that, what would it be a similar expectation that there would be an enhanced service in regards to administrative support, or what does that look like?
Initially during the transition, it'd be the current state would transfer over. But certainly the intent is, as opportunities arise around vacancies becoming vacant and increased efficiency, that over time those support staff numbers would actually be reduced over time.
Okay. Mr. Manuel?
Yeah, just to support that analysis, one of the activities that was undertaken was a benchmarking exercise. And when it comes to the civilian support side of things, and not civilian support in the way of peace officers or outreach workers, but true administrative taskings, what was found that is Grande Prairie's percentage of administrative support positions to a portion of sworn officers accounted for about 42%. The national average is 30%, and the benchmark against Brandon, Medicine Hat, CU St. Marie, North Bay, like our comparator mid-size police services, is 28%. So we, in terms of positions, that's a difference of 18 FTEs. So fairly significant. So we do believe there's opportunity that exists there.
Perfect. Sorry, I just had a question from council. Does that include mobile outreach?
They wouldn't be considered administrative support. They'd be operational support and not part of that ratio.
Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you, Mayor Clayton. One thing I'm really thinking through is training and recruitment. I'm curious, in your financial modeling, what kind of attrition rates are you planning for in terms of us either not graduating cadets through our training program and also losing officers pretty quick in service?
Mr. Newton?
Yes, that's something that we certainly considered and looked at during the transition planning. As a comparison, we looked at municipal police services in Alberta and elsewhere, in actual fact. From a recruit attrition perspective, we looked at a number of First Nations and municipal police services in Alberta, including the Edmonton Police Service. The response that we got back from the chiefs of those services was that loss of recruits during training was essentially zero to negligible. So we based that on a 1%. Edmonton was slightly higher at 5%. So from our forecasting around attrition of recruits, we're looking at the higher end of that, so that we're not taken by surprise, as it were, which is at the 5%, which is significantly higher than the other police services within Alberta, but we're basing that on the experience of the Edmonton Police Service.
Councillor Bressie?
Yeah, so what's the, try to pick what follow-up I want to pick. And then how about what's the assumption in terms of attrition rates after they get out of an academy and once they're already in the force?
And again, working on the Edmonton Police Service model, we're looking at 5% attrition, natural attrition rate, which essentially would be essentially 5 replacement police officers on an annual basis, worst case scenario.
You said only one follow-up, but could I ask? It is on this topic.
If it's...
I'm on the same topic.
Sure.
Okay. I'm just curious, those are significantly lower than RCMP attrition rates. So why do you feel that a municipal service would be lower than RCMP depot and attrition?
You're correct. I believe the annual attrition rate of the RCMP is 19.8, so 20% basically attrition rate. So yes, significantly higher. The experience that we've gained from our research is that generally police officers stay with the municipal police service. If they join a municipal police service, then they serve out their time as a police officer with that one municipal police service. Now there are exceptions, but those exceptions are minimal in number. So there's just a significant difference around the retention rates between the RCMP and municipal police services generally, and established through our research.
That's all you get.
Yep.
Councillor Thiessen.
Thanks, Mayor Clayton. Thanks, gentlemen. So today we're going to make a vote, and it's going to impact Grande Prairie one way or another going forward for the future past year 6. So a lot of the transition costing has been done up to year 6, and I've tried to find. I haven't seen a lot past year 6, so it's good to know that we can make the transition relatively cost-free. Some things that I just noted and I need a bit of clarity on, especially in regards to the capital costs. So I was looking at the capital costs for year 6. It's about $1.5 million. Police IT at $434,000 in year 6 is to reflect regular ongoing operations. I guess my concern is with IT, we're talking about a state-of-the-art, super secure system that's going to be needed to be updated frequently. So I'm assuming this 434 is program updates, but what happens if the hardware needs to be updated? Like years ago, we implemented an asset management program through the city. It cost us $8 million over a few years. Are we looking at those same costs in year 7 to 10 for updating this computer hardware?
So in regard to what you're talking about is ongoing capital costs, which is table 22. And as you indicated, year 6 shows in the police IT $434,000. The intent is to continue that funding level across all future years. So year 6 on your chart, the reason it stops there is that ultimately says the transition's over at that point, and that's your ongoing operating projection. So where that 434 actually originated from is the RCMP provides something called a multi-year financial plan to us, which indicates what their annual costs for those items are. When it comes to specifically technology, if you take the average annual expenditure for those capital-related items and add them up over the future 5 years and you divide them out, it gives you an annual amount. The annual amount the RCMP has allocated to it for Grande Prairie is $231,000. What we've done is identify that at a municipal level, there's some additional IT and technology requirements we want to have for the service. So we've actually topped up both the ongoing capital and the ongoing operating as it pertains to those expenditures. So yeah, we do agree with you that that is not a one-time capital. That's an ongoing capital. And for mid-size police services like our comparators, the annual capital plans for those services are landing around $1.1 to $1.3 million a year, which we're right in line with at 1.5.
Councillor Thiessen, I see Mr. Martin from MMP had potentially some additional context. And now your hand's down, so now that I've recognized you, I'll just see if you did have anything to add.
Thank you. Mr. Manuel covered most of my comments, but I would just add to those comments that, as Mr. Manuel mentioned, year 6 represents more of your normal ongoing operations. Obviously, future years would be affected by inflation as those increases go along. But that 437,000 would be continued in future years. And to your point, you wouldn't necessarily be spending all of that money in 1 year. Some years, in year 9, for example, you may have a large purchase, which would be significant, and then other years you may be spending significantly less. That represents an average, which is very, very healthy and well in line with other services, as Mr. Manuel indicated, to cover your needs on the technology side.
Go ahead, Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much for those answers. Appreciate it. Just going back to that table 22 again here. With the vehicle fleet, we have it in year 6, 585, 800, but we're going to be transitioning officers into positions prior to that. What are they going to drive in before then? Are they just going to ride the police cruisers or bylaw, or what are we planning for that?
Mr. Manuel?
Yeah, so if you actually went up to table 21, that's where we have, so table 22 represents ongoing capital. And as you indicated, in year 6, there's 585. That's the same rationale that we used for the IT numbers. Essentially, we went back to what the RCMP spend on an annual basis, averaged over a number of years, and that's where that number comes from. When you go to table 21, you'll see that these are startup costs, and within startup costs, you'll see vehicle fleet. And year 1, we have, for instance, $777,000, and it continues in the 600s in the years across there. Those are the purchase of new patrol vehicles to essentially replace one for one the existing fleet that the RCMP have in Grande Prairie.
Sorry, can I pull my Bressie card?
Sure, and this is the last one.
All right, thank you. So in regards to that, year 6, 585,800. We said that on average, a police cruiser lasts about 36 months before we have to sell it back. That was based off of the last report. Pretty much they go back. So that just informed me this weekend. I was like, well, then that means we're going to have to do a full recovery, but it's costing us 700 and 600. So why is it 100,000 less in year 6 if we have to replace those cars 3 years later?
Mr. Manuel?
So it's actually not 3 years. It's so the RCMP standard, and the standard for the majority of police services, is 4 years or 160,000 kilometers, whatever comes first. Now, the that replacement cycle is built into the ongoing capital piece. So essentially, the vehicles that are purchased, later operated, say year 2, year 3, they will start coming up for life cycle replacement, year 6, year 7. Now, in the context of the city of Grande Prairie, enforcement services and the peace officers, for instance, we keep their vehicles for 10 years as opposed to the 4 years. Under this model, where we have peace officers and outreach workers amalgamated into the police service, the idea that probably makes sense is when that vehicle's done being a primary response vehicle for the police service, that vehicle could transition to be utilized by the peace officers and continue that life cycle in excess of the 4-year mark. Additionally, not all the police vehicles, actually a significant portion of the police vehicles, aren't what you would consider marked patrol cars with lights and sirens and those sorts of things. A lot of them are detective administration type vehicles that are just regular cars and trucks that don't have to cycle out at that same frequency.
Thank you.
Councillor Berg.
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. So I'm just going to throw out a metaphor here because this is how my brain frames it. So when we look at these reports, we see a stack of parts, again, right down to the tie clips and the toques. What I love is a real-world example. So we've got all of these parts, we put them together, but we've already got a functioning machine. Can you deep dive a little bit more into Medicine Hat, which is a functioning machine that is comparable in the same province to what we have? So I know you've mentioned the per capita rate, but again, on your trip to Medicine Hat, can you give us some more information as to what you learned as a real-world functioning comparable?
So just to clarify the question, Councillor, compare what we believe the difference is to be between...
Sorry, do you mean operationally?
Yeah, operationally, yeah. So again, let's say, do you have the population of Medicine Hat to Grande Prairie? Do you have how many officers they have? Again, I just want some more background other than just a financial per capita number. I want to know a little bit more detail. Again, it's a functioning machine that's within our province that I guess what I want to know and show, I guess, to the people that are questioning is we're not reinventing the wheel here. This already exists, the template exists, and we're not doing anything radical or unbecoming.
And Mr. Manuel, to be fair, if you want to come back to that question as we're sort of in that financial stream, please feel free to come back to it.
Yeah, and I'd accept that.
Certainly. So I'll touch on it now, and I think we can expand upon it a little bit later today. But ultimately, it comes down to this. The Medicine Hat Police Service has a authorized strength, or actually a funded police strength of about 112 police officers. They perform their own specialized services in the same capacity to which we are projected to provide them locally here. That includes both their local emergency response team, tactical unit capability. That includes major crimes unit, forensics, police dog services. The integration of community peace officers is built within their police service. They operate their own police dispatch in conjunction with fire and 911 in the same format that we are proposing to do here. The population of Medicine Hat's within 1,000 people of the population of Grande Prairie. It is an oil and gas-based economy, a regional service hub that has healthcare facilities and regional amenities that draw a larger population to its community. So in all of those ways, there's a great deal of similarity between the city of Medicine Hat and the city of Grande Prairie. Additionally, we're both operating within the Alberta Police and Environment. So they have provided a very valuable benchmark for us.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Berg. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Clayton. I just want to go back to training. Councillor Bressie asked a couple of questions that I wanted to, so I can get a few more in the queue now. So you're mentioning Edmonton Police were about 5% turnover is what they're kind of what we're forecasting in our model. Can you give me an idea what the RCMP currently is at in Grande Prairie now, so I can kind of have a apples to apples kind of comparable?
From a recruit training attrition perspective, I can't speak to Grande Prairie specifically, but certainly on a national basis at Depot in Regina, they currently it's 29.8%. Just 1 second, I'll just confirm that. I'm going to err on the side of caution, say there's 19% attrition rate from Depot.
Okay, so and I appreciate that. I do think that the training will be easier and more attainable for people if it is localized, but are we not concerned that we're saying we're going to do a quarter of what the RCMP is going to do? And my concern with that is when we had the RCMP conversation, one of their biggest feeling of loss of jobs is that there's only so much they can go up in the scale in Grande Prairie. That won't change whether we have municipal force. So how do we combat that when you want to move up in a system of a hierarchy in your career and there's only one superintendent, there's only so many positions available to move up in that system? Are we not concerned that our attrition rate is going to be a little bit worse because of that?
Mr. Manuel?
Okay, yeah, I can jump in on that. So I think we're talking two numbers, and I can address them both. So one is recruit attrition, and recruit attrition, anecdotally, what you hear coming out of Regina is when you go to Regina and a recruit is trained there, there's a number of pressures that an individual is facing. So one, all RCMP recruit training is performed in Regina. So you're leaving your home community, you're going there. You're also not paid a salary while you're there. You get a $500 and I believe $25 a week allowance, and your room and board's covered. But certainly being away from one's family and support networks for 6 months in a different community with some potential financial strain can be difficult for some folks. And I think that plays out in some of the attrition that you see there. It's not necessarily attrition because people didn't meet the policing standards and subsequently weren't successful. On the municipal model, that's one of the benefits that we wanted to try to embrace as around if you could provide training locally, you take that pressure away. It's really a job where you're attending Monday to Friday during the days and learning the skills that you need to learn. Now, we could very well if we had to export our training, be in a similar situation to what the RCMP are experiencing with Depot. Now, in regard to annual attrition, that's going to land somewhere around 15 to 20%, where members in Grande Prairie would rotate out from Grande Prairie detachment to another policing jurisdiction, another RCMP unit per se. To the point around why do we think a municipal service will be better than that? Well, frankly, it's a result of the cross-country visits we did to these municipal police services that reported to us that they do not see the attrition. If they have attrition, it's typically related to retirements, and they may have one or two, an organization the size where there's 100 police officers may see one or two police officers that are experienced relocate. Those relocations are generally more to do with family matters, where either a spouse has a spouse or themselves might have an aging parent or something like that they just want to be closer to. But the services we engaged with told us they received just as many transfers in from other agencies, such as the RCMP, offsetting those. Camrose is a prime example. So Camrose reported to us when we visited there that they lost 2 officers to the Edmonton Police Service this past year, but they got back 2 more experienced police officers from Edmonton into Camrose. One of the real focuses on municipal policing is the recruiting people from the region. So having a focused recruitment effort on individuals that have connections to the communities or nearby communities. So in Grande Prairie's context, we would see our primary recruiting market as the 300,000 people that make up our trading area. That'd be a great place to focus developmental efforts on. One of the benefits with policing compared to other industries that sometimes we face issues with in Grande Prairie is there's not a requirement for advanced education to come to policing with advanced education. So like engineers and doctors and stuff, unfortunately, we can't deliver that training locally in Grande Prairie. And our students end up going to larger centers, and we try to attract them back after they spent 4 years in another community, and that can at times be challenging. One of the benefits we have with policing is similar to our fire department, is all of the positions that we're recruiting for here are a guarantee of $100,000+ a year. The entry requirements are essentially high school, and then once they're hired through a competitive selection process, they are trained and paid to be trained with all the necessary skills required to be successful in those roles. So essentially, we don't need people to leave the community to get experience and training to come back to our community. We can provide all of that locally here, and it really opens up some doors for people. And that's been the experience of these other services, and frankly why they don't see a lot of the attrition. One of the things that happens in the RCMP, on your first posting, you don't really get to dictate where your first posting is. You can certainly put forward preferences, but it doesn't come as a surprise. The majority of contract policing, as the mayor indicated, only 20% of Canadians are policed by the RCMP, and none of them in Ontario and Quebec are. So if you're an RCMP officer going through recruit training and you graduate and you're from Ontario and Quebec, you're not going back to Ontario or Quebec in all likelihood in your first posting, which means you're coming to a place like Grande Prairie. Often those folks desire to go back east, and following their time in Grande Prairie, they have opportunities at times to do that. So it's just a different worker.
So I guess just to follow up on that, like, so we're anticipating we're going to have 100 members, and then we're going to be training 5 a year once we're built out.
So once we're fully built out, that's, around that, 5 to 7 a year is what the municipal police services of our size are experiencing.
So to put that in context, we're expecting the average person to last 19 years. So every 20 years, we'd need 5 people rotating through, and we're somehow anticipating that we're going to be able to have a 19-year average in our staff to stick around with this model.
Correct. So the average The reason that typically works in policing is because the way the pension plan is built is essentially when you get into policing, you have the benefit of a 25-year pension plan. So you come in at 21 years old, at 46 years old, you can leave with a full pension. And very similar to the fire service, I can ask Mr. Lemieux maybe to speak to this. We essentially see next to zero of the firefighters leaving prior to their pensionable time.
I have a whole bunch more questions on training, but I'll hop out of the queue for now.
Sure. I just wanted to follow up on that retention piece. So that 5% that you noted is not just in comparison to Edmonton. It's municipal forces across Canada. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So across Canada, municipal forces traditionally have a 5% attrition rate compared to a almost 20% RCMP attrition rate. Yes?
So I'll speak to the mid-sized services
Sure.
because obviously I didn't look at the Toronto Police Service,
Right.
for instance,
Okay.
which is a little bit different.
Comparable municipalities across Canada.
That being said, the 20% RCMP attrition rate, I just want to be clear, that's from recruit attrition.
Okay.
I'll have to double check here on their annual attrition rate as an organization.
Maybe
I'm
you
not
can
sure
come back to
that's
that. That'd be great.
accurate.
Thank you. Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. I want to change to a different direction for a few minutes here. One of the benefits to having a municipal force is that we would be dispatching locally rather than from a centralized dispatch in Edmonton. However, while we have a very proficient and effective 911 dispatch system in place already, we're going to be very cramped for space. In fact, we already are cramped for space, I believe, in that dispatch office. I am wondering if your numbers have looked at what it will take to expand 911 dispatch to include local policing in addition to fire and ambulance.
Mr. Manuel.
Yes, certainly. So working with the deputy chief at GP 911, we have put together a costing as it relates to both the additional staffing as well as hardware, software requirements to take on the policing component. One of the things that's projected right now is not all of those seats have to be co-located in the same center right now because space is a concern. So the model has it so it can work with the policing dispatch occurring off-site from where the fire 911 is done now. However, we have had discussions about the desirability of having a consolidated center, and there's future work that has to be done around that. I think our preference would be to co-locate everybody together, and as you had indicated, they are frankly at a spacing challenge. They have spacing challenges already. So regardless of whether we proceed with municipal policing or not, I think that's going to come to a head, and there's going to have to be discussions around the most appropriate facilities for them in the future or what renovations may be necessary. This will just further trigger those conversations. Now, is this budget include the construction or renovation or substantial renovation at GP 911? No, it doesn't.
But if I could just follow up, but it does include the additional cost, the operational cost of adding a call center,
I see
dispatch
Mr. Martin's
center.
was looking to chime in here.
Yeah, I can confirm that we have added the costs for adding dispatchers as well as the equipment required for dispatch for police services.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you for that. Councillor O'Toole.
Mayor Clayton, I've had a number of inquiries over the weekend and the last few days, and there's a number of people in this city that feel that our police service is costing us very little. Can you go over the total that we paid last year and if there's any federal funding or provincial funding at this time?
I can just give me 1 sec to be accurate. Okay, so the 2002, so the combined policing expenditures for 2022 are budgeted at $31.4 million in expenditures, subtracted by $5.59 million in revenues, for a total expense less revenues of $2.58 million. And of that, approximately $2 million.
25.
Oh, sorry, 25. Yeah, 25.8.
So just sorry, Mr. Manuel, just because I know many people are taking notes, could you just reiterate those numbers again?
Yeah. So 2022, the budgeted numbers, because the actuals weren't available at the time of the report, showed the total expenditures at $31.461187 million. The projected revenues, so the projected revenues would include all the grants and fine revenues, those sorts
So
of
for
things.
those who are watching, let's expand on that. Those are ATE, automated transport traffic
Photo radar.
enforcement revenues, ATE revenues, and the 10% from the federal government.
So the 10% actually doesn't show up in revenue. It actually is just reducted. It's deducted from what's called the enforcement contract costs. The essentially, for people writing down, we'll go back. So we got
Perfect.
5.5. So $5,592,570 in revenue. So the total policing expenditure less revenues is $25,868,617. It's table 10 of the
on
report.
Yeah, sure. One sec, Councillor Blackmore. Let's just. So as you mentioned, 31.4 minus the 5.5 revenue, which includes grants, and you maybe can lightly expand on those, and AT revenue.
Correct. Now, the subsidy that we get from the federal government for the 10% is only applicable to the RCMP positions. It's not applicable to the building, not applicable to the admin costs, the peace officers, the outreach, those so on. It's worth just over $2 million.
Councillor O'Toole, does that answer your question?
Well, I kind of wanted it out in the public because, like I said, a lot of people said, well, how are we going to pay for this? And I'm saying you already are paying for it. So it's just a matter of some changes. So yes, that does answer my question. Thank you.
Okay, I also see Mr. Martins from MMP had some additional context, and then I'll go to Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Mayor. Just the additional context being the table 10 in the report there does not include the automated traffic enforcement, both the revenue and the expenses associated with that contract as it is contracted out. So we've excluded that from that table.
Okay. Corrected. All right, Councillor Blackmore, you had something on that.
Yes, my understanding is that the $25.86 million does not include mobile outreach or enforcement costs. And my understanding is the total amount is actually greater than that the city pays.
Mr. Manuel?
I apologize. I'll just confirm. Maybe Mr. Martin knows. I was looking at table 10. I just have to confirm that table 10
Mr. Martins?
Does or doesn't?
Table 10 would include your mobile outreach cost in the budget for 2022.
Yeah.
And sorry, I forget, was there another cost that you were asking about as well?
Sorry, Councillor Blackmore, what were the mobile outreaches included, and what was the other item you were curious if
Enforcement services.
Enforcement services.
Yes, enforcement services, revenue and expenses is included in the budget 2022 line in Table 10, except for the automated traffic enforcement related expenses and revenue.
Okay.
So it's 25.8 million.
Yes.
For 2022, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You bet. Councillor O'Connor.
Yes, I hate to go backwards, but I would, sorry. On the civilian supports, I understand how many positions. I'm led to believe there are 65 positions that support the boots on the ground. And is there not a contingent that supports K Division and Ottawa in part of those numbers? Am I correct in that or not?
Mr. Manuel.
Yeah, well, and in regard to the civilian support positions, excluding outreach workers and peace officers, the RCMP have approximately 59, enforcement services has about 5. So that's probably accurate in regard to the 64. Not entirely sure what you mean about supporting Ottawa per se, but those civilian positions support the policing operations locally here. If
Do you mean, Councillor O'Connor, maybe I can help here. Do you possibly mean the approximately $4 million that is spent in support through Ottawa's support? Is that what you're referencing, or?
No, I just heard a number that there were staffing that were supporting some of those positions. So that's what I heard. If I'm incorrect, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify that.
So where the confusion might lie is the RCMP detachment does have a, so within the Grande Prairie RCMP detachment presently, there is some rural and provincial units that are located in there as well. And because of that, there is a handful of public service employees, which are Government of Canada employees, that provide some various administrative support.
Okay.
But we do not fund those positions.
Okay. Thank you. And one more?
If it's a follow-up, sure. If not,
Ah, darn. I'll come in later.
thanks. Councillor Bressie.
So I've got some assumptions about this, but I'd rather not be making assumptions about this. I'm trying to figure out, so with RCMP policing, where we've built a model where we're going to pay officers a little bit more than they're making now. We've also built a model that doesn't get a 10% subsidy from the federal government, and yet we think it'll be a little bit cheaper potentially. Can you just step back for me? Where are the cost savings in this model? How are we making up that 10% and even finding a little bit more than that in this model?
So that's a fair question, and I'll allow MNP to weigh in on this too, but I'll start it off. So within Grande Prairie's RCMP contract, we have what's known as direct costs and indirect costs. So within indirect costs, so the direct costs, frankly, those aren't projected to change any cheaper. If anything, we've actually added money to the annual cost of operating the police service as far as the day-to-day operational items go. Where the real change is on things such as divisional administration. So for the 2022-2023 year, under the divisional administration item alone, what happens is for indirect costs, these are costs that are incurred at a provincial level or divisional level in the RCMP case, which is province, and all those costs are pooled together and then allocated on a per member basis. So if we have 98 members, we get the 98 of the total pool of officers that generated those expenses. So for things like what's not performed locally here is finance services related to like RCMP payroll, for instance, right? procurement activities, the help desk, the senior administration at Key Division, those sorts of costs. So the total cost in divisional administration for us is $3.4 million for this year. We still need to provide corporate services like procurement and IT and in administration locally here. What Grande Prairie benefits from is having an existing infrastructure as it relates to the larger corporate entity of the city of Grande Prairie that we're able to. We have to add some additional capacity to make up the 100 positions that are coming in-house, but because our corporate structure has the efficiencies of having its own existing ERP program, so like the enterprise resource planning software that we just made a significant multi-million-dollar investment in, because we already have the fire computer-aided dispatch system that we spent millions of dollars on for fire, but can be leveraged for police as well. Because we have that infrastructure already here, we don't need to duplicate it elsewhere, which allows us to have some cost benefit. Now, certainly for smaller communities, there can be benefit in those pooled expenses. And when you have a greater concentration of resources in a location, you can often find economies of scale. Where economies of scale can slip up is when you're branching those people out across dozens, if not well over 100 locations in the province. And servicing all those people from remote locations is frankly costly. And it appears as though we have benefited by bringing those services in-house locally. So not only are we repatriating jobs that would be exported outside of the community and bringing them back in, frankly, the volume of resources required to do them is lower under the municipal model because our city has existing infrastructure to support a number of those activities. Some of the other additional costs are training, for instance. So we talk about the Regina Training Academy. It's not as though the city doesn't pay for that. We pay for it on a per member basis, and for 2022-23, that projected amount is $505,000 for the city of Grande Prairie. Recruiting. So we don't have an RCMP recruiting office in Grande Prairie, and they periodically come up here and we'll do information sessions and so on. Well, the city of Grande Prairie pays $141,544 for that activity. The same goes with the Public Complaints Commission in Ottawa. In order to receive public complaints in Ottawa, the city of Grande Prairie pays $55,809 this year. So there is a lot of expenses that we incur just on a per member billing.
Good. Councillor Bressie?
Yeah, so if I'm understanding this right, so you take a really rural, remote area such as High Level or Fort Chip, and you compare it to a urban area like Grande Prairie, we're paying the same per member costs for those things. Just taking the total cost across the province, divided by the amount of members across the province, multiplying by how much we have here. No differential for efficiencies of being in an urban area.
Mr. Manuel?
That is correct. And actually, our city manager actually usually says this much more eloquently than I just did, but that was essentially the gist of it.
Mr. Martins, anything to add in regards to that, the potential savings that have been addressed in the transition plan?
Thank you. I would just echo Mr. Manuel's comments that really the administration piece is where we saw the biggest difference when comparing the two models. And from M&P's work across other services, what we've seen is that the smaller services with, for example, 20 officers really benefit from that per member cost allocation. It saves them significantly on the administrative piece. But once you get up to a larger service in the 80 to 100 officer range, you're not realizing those same savings. And at some point, it becomes more efficient to bring some of those services in-house.
Thanks. Moving on, Councillor Bosch.
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. So my question, I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off because this is exactly what I hear from the public. I don't know, I can't even tell you how many times. If we're looking at 16.3 million for this transition and a potential of 2.6 million for contingency, the province has given us 9.7 million for the first 3 years. Where is the money coming from?
Well, it's 3 years put into 2.
Where is the money coming from for the additional funds to move this project ahead if it's so voted in?
Mr. Manuel?
So I'm going to ask the city manager how he wants to, or who he wants to direct that question to, because our job was more around the cost, not so much around how we were going to pay for it.
Ultimately, though, the public wants to know, because it's either the two questions: how are we going to pay for it? What's it going to do to my tax base? And is the quality of service going to be the same?
Mr. Nicolay, and then I also wanted to address an item of correspondence that's in Council's package for today's Council meeting. But go ahead, Mr. Nicolay.
I believe I was going to reference that if you want to go ahead.
Sure. I just need 1 second here to follow up. So as indicated, and maybe there's a little bit of confusion, the provincial government the week before last announced that they wish to support the City of Grande Prairie in their transition. The numbers as laid out in a 5-year transition plan, each year had a specific number identified to them. What the province did was take 90% of those per year numbers. They took the first 3 years and front loaded it into 2 years. So the 90% cost of 3 years without a contingency were front loaded into 2 years. Last week, and it's in Council's package today, and I'm just looking to find the letter. Council received a letter in regards to, and I'll go back a little bit. In conversations with the Government Council is aware that Minister Ellis and the Minister of Finance and the President of the Treasury Board indicated that their intent was to work with Council and the City of Grande Prairie in regards to the costs associated to the transition in year 4 and year 5. Last week, Council received a letter that is in your Council document today. Many things in it. It talks about the work that the province has been doing. It identifies the amount of 5.4 for the fiscal year of 23 and 24, as well as 4.3 in 24 and 25. Those are 90% of the first 3 years front-loaded into 2 years. The other item that's addressed in that letter, and I'll read it here, those online can find it in today's Council package. Should Grande Prairie decide to establish its own municipal police force, the Ministry of Public Safety and Emergency Services is prepared to work closely with your transition team to monitor progress with a goal of ensuring the success of any potential transition. I recognize the City of Grande Prairie has requested greater financial assistance from that contained in Budget 2023, and I would like to assure you that the Government of Alberta is fully committed and prepared to work with municipal officials to assist in supporting any future funding assistance requirements for the fiscal year 2025, 2026, and beyond. So that information is there, and that's in regards to a provincial announcement. I will remind Council that Council has other tools for funding a transition. As we all know, there are reserves in place. There is decisions that Council makes every year when it comes to a budget that could, if Council chooses to have no tax impact on this transition, there are tools that Council has to make those decisions. Thanks. Councillor Bosch, you're good?
I'm good.
Thanks.
People just want to see the numbers, so
For sure.
can absolutely understand that.
Absolutely. Councillor Thiessen.
Thanks, Mayor Clayton. Gentlemen, just a question in regards to insurance. So it says that each member is going to be insured in year 1 at about $30,000 cost per member, and then year 2 to 6, $40,000. That's in note 7 from table 20. Anyways, it also says that there's going to be additional cost per vehicle. But my question for you is in regards to member insurance. I actually have 2. So From year 2 to 6, it's 40K. What do we anticipate it'll be beyond that? Still 40K or?
Mr. Manuel?
So I'm just.
I do see Mr. Martin's potentially had his mic off. Were you looking to jump in here?
I'm happy to jump in here.
Thank you.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. So in regards to the insurance amounts there, those are incremental increases in insurance that have been budgeted. So the city of Grande Prairie already has insurance in place, and the city has approached its insurer as far as what the incremental cost increase with ensuring policing services provided by the city would be. So that $40,000 per year falls within the higher range of the estimate that we received in terms of the additional cost. So the total insurance policy will be more than $40,000, but you're already paying a portion of that, which the $40,000 is in addition to cover the addition of your own municipal policing service if you so choose. In addition, there's an amount listed for insuring vehicles on the police service. Going past year 5, it's anticipated that, or year 6, pardon me, you'll see cost increases from inflation across all categories. I would expect that at some point you would see that on your insurance as well, but it wouldn't be anticipated to be outside of normal inflationary increases beyond that.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick follow-up, if I may. So that $40,000 insurance per member, does that? I noticed in table 20 that we also made some contingencies in year 4 to 6 for a couple $100,000 for legal. Does that insurance per member cover legal costs against the municipal police service?
Mr. Manuel? Or sorry, go ahead, Mr. Martins.
I could just clarify the $40,000 is not per member. It's a per year cost to the city to cover the incremental insurance cost for the police service. And then for the second part of your question, my understanding is that your legal services would be covered under your insurance policy, but I'll let Mr. Manuel speak more to the policy details.
Mr. Manuel?
Yeah, and I may have the city solicitor weigh in on this as well, but in the part of the so the city carries a general liability insurance policy. The adjustments as a result of operating municipal police service from our insurer are the estimated numbers and our projected numbers within the budget there. In the event that there was a significant occurrence that resulted in litigation, the insurer's solicitors would be engaged to ultimately defend that claim, if that's correct, Mr. Solicitor.
Mr. Freeman, did you have some additional context for that?
Through the chair, the information just relayed is correct. In the event a claim is brought against the city and it's covered under the insurance policy would enable the city to tap into those legal resources and have those costs covered.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Palat. And sorry, just before you start, apologies. I'm going to take this as the last question, then we're going to take a 15-minute break as it's almost 10:30.
Okay, good. Yeah, perfect.
Just come back to it.
Just a question. I'm just going to keep coming back to training because I'm still not there yet on that one. So out of the 3.4 million that we're saying we have the potential to have savings through administration costs, 505 of it's attributed to training.
No, sorry, I should clarify. So the 3.4 does not include the training. The training is in addition to that. The training is outside of that.
Okay, so I'll stick on the training. I'll come back to the other 3.4 after our break. But can you tell me the most northern community that you looked at that has a police service, municipal police service, and what their retention and attraction rates look like?
Mr. Manuel, do you have it broken down by detachment in regards to attrition? If you need a minute, we can come back to that.
Yeah, we may have to circle back to that one. Not readily available right now.
Okay. And I can just, I mean, like they can come back to that. That's fine. I guess just to follow up on that, I'm still really concerned. We're thinking we're only going to be training 5 members a year. Moving past when we're built out, I want to believe that, and I think it's great to believe that, but we're struggling to get people to move to northern communities, especially on a topical job like this. So I'm not sold on the 5, but even if I use the 5, when I look at what Depot pays with the $525 a week, full room and board, uniform, assistance allowance to move back and forth to go see your family in between, the numbers that I come up with are about 35,000. The RCMP is saying it's closer to 40,000. So if we use the RCMP numbers, they're saying $200,000 a year would be what it would cost us to train these 5 individuals. And we haven't got a body training them yet. So I'm wondering on the 505 at even 5 bodies, can we break even on that?
So let me clarify on the costing. So those training costs are really contractual training costs. So built within the salary plan that's not illustrated there are actually training instructors that are internally employed. So our cost to train each recruit, aside from their wages, because their wages are in addition to that, just the cost to deliver the training for the 12 recruits that we project each year across the years there is $29,000 per trainee. And those costs are from quotes obtained from the training provider themselves, as well as our internal modeling around the staffing costs of our dedicated internal resources assigned to instruct as well. So they're actually very in line with what the training costs per member are for, Edmonton and those sorts of areas. The benefit we have is if we were to send them to Edmonton, we'd pay the $30,000 plus we would pay their travel and accommodation for those 6 months that they're there.
But I guess under this model, we're assuming everybody's going to live in Grande Prairie to become we just said earlier, we were driving from a 300,000 range. So if somebody from Fort Nelson wants to be a city municipal police member, are we not going to be paying them assistance to go back and forth to home like the RCMP are paying through Depot now?
So just to clarify, the RCMP only pay you to get to depot and to come back from depot when you're done. You don't get to travel back and forth to visit your family in between. That's on your dime if you're going to do that. Essentially, if we hire somebody from Fort Nelson and they're essentially becoming an employee of the city of Grande Prairie, and their training is going to occur here, but they're essentially at that point a resident of the city of Grande Prairie, we're not going to pay to send them back and forth.
So just so I can understand this, we are going to be using municipal staff from our municipal police force to train this?
So the instructors, like the legal instructors and human relations instructors and those sorts of things, would be through a contract with a existing police academy. The hard skills, such as the firearms qualifications, the defensive tactics, those skills that we have to recertify everybody on an annual basis, will be provided by internal training sergeants, which are built within the budget today.
And so
Nicolay had some data as well. Thanks.
Just a clarification, and it perhaps broadens the point that I do encourage you to go ahead and pursue right to until you're satisfied, Councillor Plott. But I did hear a reference to the extraordinary circumstances in attracting and recruiting people into the Grande Prairie area, and I've heard that, frankly, from a number of people, including people from the community. I honestly think that's a misconception. Not to suggest that it isn't difficult to do up here, but when we differentiate between other cities, we seem to feel that there is a intrinsic disadvantage that Grande Prairie has to face in attracting and retaining people. It is, in fact, a phenomenon in smaller centers throughout the country. I did over 20 years in Medicine Hat, including right up to city manager for a number of years, and dealing with police services as part of my portfolio. Smaller communities typically have the same kind of problems that we experience here in attracting and retaining people. Sault Ste. Marie and Brandon, while they may not be northern communities, they're communities that have the same kind of challenges in terms of quality of life, that people will perceive that Toronto is a better place to live or Winnipeg is a better place to live. Medicine Hat, we used to routinely lose people to Calgary who felt that they wanted to be able to watch a Flames game in their local city. So it is a phenomenon that happens in smaller centers, and the number, the 5% attrition number that's built into this budget or into this forecast is what those communities are experiencing. The phenomenon that offsets it in police services, as opposed to other industries in this community and those communities in which we might see it, is that this is a career path for people to join a paramilitary organization in police service in relatively controlled circumstances, get a 25 and out pension, defined benefit pension, which is virtually unheard of in industry today, be paid very well for the services and be part of their community. So when we forecast 5% attrition, we base it on benchmarking to other similar cities in which I'm familiar with the circumstances. And I don't think that it's exaggerated, and I don't think that we're going to find the experience to be anything greater than what you would find in Medicine, Lethbridge, Sault Ste. Marie, Brandon, or any of the cities that were studied.
Well, I want to believe that, and I hope that works, and would not lose sleep over it if we did. That would be great. I guess just one last thing on the training then. So if I'm understanding, we're going from 100 bodies to 100 bodies, but now we're actually out of those 100 bodies, we're going to be training. And so one of those bodies isn't boots on the ground and necessarily more. We're actually taking somebody that would have been a boots on the ground currently and moving into an actual training role. So we're, in essence, down boots on the ground from currently what we have, if I understand that.
Mr. Manuel?
So this model actually sees, so for instance, the RCMP has an FTE locally, a sergeant that is dedicated to overseeing the training program for, because even the RCMP have significant recertification that occurs on a annual basis throughout the year, and they are supplemented by a number of part-time instructors from the local contingent as well, very similar under the proposed model that we have here. Ultimately, we believe the municipal police service, just based on the experience of other municipal police services, is much more. Am I going to say that the allocation, whether that's 100 or 104, whatever that number may be, is going to always be at 100%? No, of course not. I don't think there's a city municipal department or any employer of any size that always maintains 100% throughout the year. It kind of comes to your point, though, if we do have more recruits, say it's not 5, say it ends up being 10 that we have to do in a year, we, at that point, there's some variances that occur there, because obviously an experienced police officer makes about twice as much money as a new recruit does. So yeah, you have costs associated with the training of that new officer, but then you get the savings of the salary on the more senior officer. So as far as numbers go, it offsets, but there is a continual balance that occurs where it's really the funding envelope that matters. Like we could essentially hire 105 police officers, and maybe we only have 100 that are funded, and you're managing the vacancies, right? Just like, and that's really what the RCMP do. When we have 110 authorized positions for them, they're really just managing the vacancies to accommodate incoming transfers and those sorts of things. So, yeah, your point's well received. I can tell you that for the startup and transition, where we really have the most significant allocation of training needs, where we're projecting 12 recruits a year for the next 4 years, right? Under that model, the startup and transition costs that are built into that $16.6 million includes the duplicate staffing, the fact that they're not boots on the ground. So we actually can't draw down the number of RCMP officers serving the community until they're boots on the ground able to provide service. So that costing is actually a big part of what drives the $16.6 million.
Okay. And I'm just wondering, and maybe it's through the city manager, last thing before break, is there any slides or projections or something specific on training and money in, money out that we can show the community? It's by far one of the biggest complaints I've had. And I can refer them to a lot of our documentation, but the reason I'm asking these questions is I can't find that information that I feel comfortable passing forward. So I think, decisions made tonight, yes or no. If we do choose to go ahead with it, I'd really like to try to educate the community on a lot of this stuff that they feel in the dark on right now. And as a council member, I feel somewhat in the dark on whether this training is going to work or not. And I appreciate the conversation today. I think it's getting me closer to it. I still have concerns about it, though, and that would, I think, go a long way moving forward.
Mr. Manuel?
Yeah, through the mayor. So certainly, I think no later than this afternoon session, we can prepare that slide for you. We have the information available. One thing that we hadn't noted is at this point we've just discussed the basic recruit training. Obviously, there's training that occurs outside basic recruit training, and that's actually found within the operational budget. And to just give you a sense, yeah, we have $271,000 allocated to that piece of training. So it's been considered. I agree that, just right now I talked about 3 separate line items and they don't explicitly say training. So we will be able to provide you that summary that you're requesting.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify one thing that you said, and then I had a question for our Chief of Protected Services. To clarify, you mentioned that in the current detachment members, there is an individual who is included in our 98 members that service our community who is solely responsible for training. Is that correct?
Primarily responsible for training. He has some secondary responsibilities as well.
Thank you. A question for Mr. Lemieux in regards on that same vein. Can you give me a comparable and an example in fire? We obviously have a significant size fire services team, and how does recruitment go in fire to obviously the same northern community that's being referenced today?
So just to clarify, in terms of attrition, turnover?
And recruitment.
So first of all, let me just say that in my 15 years with the Grande Prairie Fire Department, we've never seen 5% attrition. That would be extremely high. It's 1 to 2%. I can count on my fingers how many members we lost, and most of them have been through retirement. Okay. We have a few that have moved to be closer to home, whether they came from Ontario or Calgary. With regards to recruitment, I can tell you that we have, in the Grande Prairie Fire Department, there is no issue recruiting. There are many applicants, qualified applicants, very strong applicants, so it's never been an issue in terms of recruitment.
Great, thank you for that. So Council, we're going to take a 15-minute break. So those who are online, we'll see you back in 15 minutes. Thanks so much, everyone. Good morning and welcome back to the Council Committee of the Whole meeting of March 6th. We are still on item 2.1, the Police Service Transition Financial Q&A. We have approximately an hour left of scheduled time for Council to ask our consultants as well as our internal consultants as well as our external consultants. MMP is online for questions, and we will start by recognizing Councillor Burke. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Clayton. So just want to let everybody know that we have done a lot of work behind this. 300 pages of reports that we've read. I'm going to estimate somewhere between 20 to 30 hours of meetings and discussions and meeting with all sides in this. And just even yesterday, or on Saturday, I met with a senior member of our local RCMP just to get some more information and feedback from all sides, that we're doing our due diligence and that we're open and we're available for discussion. So in that conversation, there was one question that was asked of me that I didn't have an answer. So out of fairness, I'll propose the general question to you gentlemen. It was around Public Safety Canada. And again, this is outside of my realm, so this is educational for me too. Do we have an agreement? What discussions? Can you educate me on the process and what Public Safety Canada does?
Mr. Manuel?
Through the mayor, certainly. So Public Safety Canada is the federal ministry that oversees the RCMP and the Public Safety Canada minister. The contract, the Municipal Police Service Agreement that the City of Grande Prairie has is not with the RCMP. It's actually with the Government of Canada through Public Safety Canada and their contracted services branch.
Okay, so have we had any discussions around that? Or are there any costs? And if so, the costs to partner with that, have they been evaluated in part of this?
Mr. Manuel?
Well, I'm not sure what you would mean by cost to partner. So essentially the costs associated with our municipal policing contract, so whether that's to continue the contract or to terminate the contract, are defined by agreement, which is has been reviewed. And additionally, the province of Alberta, through its provincial police service agreement, also has a contract with Public Safety Canada. And at this point, there has been communication occurring between the Director of Law Enforcement for the province and Public Safety Canada.
All right, thank you.
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. I have two parts. One, getting back to the attraction and retention piece, as Councillor Palat had brought up, what assurances can you give us in relating to making sure that we attract officers and to this community and they will come here and be employed and start up? And I heard your piece that the transition piece is they will be boots on the ground in year 3 when the first two parts open. So please, can you answer that?
Mr. Manuel?
Okay, through the mayor. So ultimately what we have is a multi-year staffing and transition plan. So we are not looking to flick a light switch and change from RCMP to Municipal Police Service overnight. This is a 5-year staged process to ultimately staff up to those 100 municipal policing positions. The plan to do so is to, one, start by offering competitive wages that at this point are projected to exceed that of the current RCMP wages. Additionally, through the recruitment attraction strategy we've identified within the plan, there is a budgeted amount to offer experienced officer incentives to further encourage experienced police officers to join the ranks of the municipal service. The one benefit that exists amongst many of the proposed municipal service as a new employer is that it is frankly a new culture to be developed. It's not coming in with some of the historical encumbrances that exist traditional organizations, and the ability to those first employees and those first members of the police service to really dictate what the culture and the future direction of that service looks like is very enticing to several. And we've had several members through the course of this planning cycle reach out to us and express frankly, their interest, both from some within Grande Prairie and several from outside of Grande Prairie that are keen in learning more and exploring what those opportunities look like. That combined with the significant investment we're looking at as far as equipment and technology upgrades and stuff like that, what we're talking about is brand new stuff. And there's very few organizations that have the ability to start with the equipment and uniforms and those sorts of things that we're projected to start with.
Okay, wonderful. And that follows in a number of emails came to us over the weekend, and quite a few people were really concerned that we're just going to be handing guns to our peace officers, and it's going to be the Wild West, and there's brutality and all kinds of things going on, and that really concerned me that someone would even think that we would approach our peace officers that way. And I know that our peace officers will have a different role, but not with guns. Am I correct?
Mr. Manuel?
So that's correct. The existing peace officers are not being made police officers. The difference there is the peace officer program will go from being a standalone department without direct policing oversight to now falling under the operational control and responsibility of the chief of police, as well as the governance of the police commission. Further to that, there is intent within the plan to adjust the training and mandate of the peace officers and essentially ensure it aligns with what the community told us as part of the engagement processes on what the community priorities are in relation to enforcement and policing. Further to that, I think that that more or less covers it off. I guess the other piece that I meant to mention was that when it comes to police officer selection and training standards, as well as the police service and governance operations, there is very well-defined and established provincial standards that have to be met. It's not a freelancing activity. The requirements to select a police officer for the City of Calgary and Edmonton, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat are all the same. And the City of Grande Prairie will have to meet those requirements, and anybody that's going to be a police officer here will have to meet those requirements.
Okay, so they'll have the adequate training and follow whatever the rules of the province are in relation to policing.
That is correct. And just for a point of clarification, both the training requirements for police officers in Alberta and the recruitment and selection standards are equivalent to that of the RCMP.
Thank you.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. I want to go back to the Service Canada, Safety Canada, Public Safety Canada aspect. Now, my understanding is should we move to a municipal service, there will still be certain services that are provided to us by the RCMP as the National Police Force, and those services will be the result of a tri-party agreement between Public Safety Canada, Public Safety Alberta, and the City of Grande Prairie, or the Police Commission in Grande Prairie. Can you kind of walk us through what those agreements look like, what other municipalities are currently experiencing for costs, and whether or not we can expect those same costs to translate to our own community?
Okay, so I'm pretty sure I see where this piece is headed. So,
sorry, if I could just interrupt for a sec. I think these are all great questions. Go ahead and answer Councillor Blackmore's questions. But this intent of this council committee, the whole, was financial Q&A.
And I'm asking for the finance part
I know.
today,
I'm just,
right now.
One previous didn't, and I'm just seeing a trend. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, certainly. So to that point, okay, so with the RCMP and Public Safety Canada, two separate things. So the first part of the question is, once the transition is complete, certainly the RCMP, from a federal policing perspective, and as the provincial police service provider, will still have a presence working in and around Grande Prairie for their various mandates. And much like Ontario and Quebec, which don't have RCMP doing contract policing at all, there's still a significant RCMP contingent in those provinces. Now, to the tripartite agreement, if council decides to proceed under our contract with the Municipal Police Service Agreement, there is a process defined in there where we essentially have to work with Public Safety Canada as to what the unwinding in transition looks like. So the scale up of the municipal service, scale down of the RCMP. So the most relevant example of that comes out of BC with the City of Surrey transition. So with that, what will happen is if the city decides to proceed with a municipal service, one of the first actions that will occur is a committee will be stood up between the province, the City of Grande Prairie, Public Safety Canada, and likely representatives from the RCMP as well, which would then meet to formalize things such as the secondment assignments as far as, the process, the protocols for municipal police officers initially to work under the RCMP, and then later for RCMP officers to work off municipal police. The fortunate thing we have is when the Surrey project initiated, they had to navigate unknown territory as to what all those agreements would look like. They ultimately have landed on agreements pertaining to those items, and we have copies of those agreements and have had opportunity to review and to learn what has worked well and what hasn't worked well regarding components of that, and have certainly taken steps to assess what could be done differently. In the Surrey context, we'll start with just a quick summary that the decision to go from a RCMP contract to a municipal police service was one that was done following a municipal election where candidates ran on that particular slate. And upon election, the proclamation was, or not, a motion was made to move ahead with forming a municipal police service. What followed that was then the subsequent transition reports and business case, and ultimately submission to the province to form the service. We went in a reverse order. So a decision to start a municipal police service was not made by council. It started with a analysis of the current state and ultimately led to the transition report you received from the third-party consultant. It fundamentally puts you in different places with different perspectives and different information that you're working with. As was indicated, we also have the additional benefit of the lessons learned from the Surrey process. It is important to note that the policing model in British Columbia is different than the policing model in Alberta. For instance, the Surrey Police Service is an independent employer. In Alberta, it's an extension of the City of Grande Prairie. So there's differences. A police board is provincially appointed there. In Alberta, it's municipally appointed. So we have the benefit of those experiences. Surrey's 8.5 times the size of the City of Grande Prairie. And then if you go as far as the financial modeling, for instance, the City of Grande Prairie estimates our startup and transition budget with the contingency of just shy of that $19 million. The City of Surrey's transition budget was projected at $66 million. Again, Surrey is 8.5 times the size of the City of Grande Prairie. So I think it's relatively fair to say that the numbers in our budget, granted, weren't compared against Surrey's, other than just to say that, those were the differences between the two. But as MNP has indicated, we weren't looking to what other municipalities were spending on their transition. We looked specifically at what the expenditures would be as it relates to the City of Grande Prairie, being cognizant of issues that may have arisen in other transitions and other municipal policing and RCMP contract models. And frankly, we've also designed a different approach to policing than what the city of Surrey designed. So there's a lot of differences there. And
I'm going to interrupt you because that's not actually what I was asking. Although it was really interesting, and I'll probably ask you that question again tonight. What I'm asking is, I know that the RCMP continue to have a presence in Medicine Hat, in Edmonton, and Calgary, and they're providing a national service to those communities at a cost. Someone's paying the cost for that, and I need to know who's paying that cost, and can we expect the same types of costs, and have you included them in this analysis?
Mr. Manuel.
That's an easier question. The city of Medicine Hat doesn't pay those costs, and neither would the city of Grande Prairie. So if it's related to provincial policing activities, it's covered through the Provincial Police Service Agreement. If it's related to federal enforcement activities, that's part of the RCMP's federal budget.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Councillor Bosch.
That was good. My question is in regards to Red Deer, since we're talking about different places. Now, I myself, when I was looking up information as well, the media had posted that Red Deer in 2019 decided not to go ahead with it due to the 5 to 10% tax implications to their citizens. That was probably the number one reason. Can you speak to the results of what happened in Red Deer and how we are different?
I certainly can. So I actually encourage anybody to go seek out that report and read the report, because you're going to find far more similarities in that report to the reports that have been conducted by the city of Grande Prairie versus differences. And I'll just start by this because I assessed it earlier. So ultimately, the city of Red Deer in 2019 commissioned a third party led, it was done by KPMG Consulting, to perform a policing service and governance review. So this review is self-identified as a macro level review. So not to the same extent that the city-led and MNP report went as far as either its duration or depth. However, they summarized, and this is a quote right out of the executive summary, the cost of the city's policing services, back at the time of the report, are comparable to the average of 9 other municipalities selected for the review. However, its crime rate is significantly higher than the average of the comparators, and its clearance rate is lower. KPMG then concluded, given the nature of the review, it is not possible to conclude objectively whether or not the city is receiving value for money for its policing services. However, the review did identify opportunities to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of policing services. In regard to the finance piece, the report estimated that a municipal police service could cost as much as 14% more than the RCMP contract due to the lower RCMP wages at the time of the report, but stated that the impacts of the RCMP's unionization and subsequent collective agreement would impact this differential. As we now know, the first collective agreement saw RCMP wages increase by 23.7%. Additionally, the estimated cost of a 4-year transition to a municipal police service was projected to be $13,583,000. That would be to transition 170 police officers. The city of Grande Prairie, again, is looking at 100 police officers. Ultimately, Red Deer City Council opted to continue with the RCMP.
Thank you for that. I think particularly the reason I brought it up is because when I research it, as many citizens will do, that's where we see the discrepancy from the report to what was listed as, taxpayer cost. And so I want to be very clear on the differences of the potential of this report moving into a municipal force in comparison to Red Deer. And as far as anybody, I would say here would know, is Red Deer still looking at it? At our size of community, that is very common, where you look, every few years into municipal force and whether that is a benefit or a detriment. So thank you for your answers.
Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Clayton. There's been a lot of concern and emails we've had about the services that people are, I guess, perceiving that we're not going to have when we switch over. The special crime investigation unit that comes out of Edmonton, the helicopter that does the flybys, those sorts of things. So can you just speak to us how we're going to safeguard our community and financially how it is and how that's been looked at and dealt with within our current model, that we're not forecasting an increase of costs, and still having those levels of confidence that we could have special crimes, that we'd have those form and fold teams that need to come up at time to time, that those are baked into this.
So just before you do, Councillor Manuel, I just remind Council, this isn't a time to discuss and debate the consideration of moving to a municipal police force. It's truly MMPs online. This is intended to be financial Q&A. Yeah. So please go ahead, but these...
I said financially because I am worried. People are worried that we're not going to have services.
Well, you said service, but...
Yeah, but when people are worried we're not going to have services, and we're saying we're going to have those in here. I just want to see financially how we just prove that out so we can give the community more confidence that we're not missing those things.
No, so that is a fair question for sure, and it does have financial considerations to it. So one of the first things to address is our specialized services, the ones that you're referring to that come from outside the community, primarily out of Edmonton into Grande Prairie, are actually provincial policing services. So those units are maintained under the provincial police service, who happen to be the RCMP, who are contracted to provide that. Our municipal police service agreement does not guarantee us cost-free access to those services. Essentially, the provincial police service agreement allows for cost recovery from a municipality, whether that municipality is RCMP-led or whether it's municipally policing-led. Now, the standard practice has been that those costs are frequently not passed on to our municipality, but they're just as equally haven't been historically passed on to the Camrose Police or the Lacombe Police when they've been accessing those services either. In regard to the specialized services that are, one, currently performed within Grande Prairie, an example of that would be one, the forensic identification section. The police dog services are two such examples. The intent is to, in what's budgeted in the model here, is to continue providing those service because of local need and frequency of use. Further to that, expanded capabilities are intended to be put in place and are budgeted to bring in tactical emergency response team capability within Grande Prairie, as opposed to, at least initially, as opposed to relying on the Edmonton call-out, and major crimes capability to investigate the majority of major crime offenses. There certainly becomes a threshold where something of significant multi-jurisdiction nature would trigger a call for assistance. However, in consulting with Medicine Hat, Lethbridge, Brandon, those other comparators, the frequency in which they request those services is frankly next to zero or negligible, is what they had indicated to us, and that the benchmarking costing that we've been comparing ourselves to includes all those services that we plan to provide locally.
Okay, so just if I can follow, so I understand. So we're not worried about the financial implications, and we're pretty confident we'll be able to have the same level of service. So I guess if I'm understanding that, part of it is, I think me and maybe the community understanding those are municipal or provincial services that are going to be supplied, whether it was us or RCMP doing that role.
Yeah. So I was going to say that is correct, with the exception of the expanded local capability of the emergency response team and in the major crimes.
Okay, and we've budgeted some funding within this plan for those as well, correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. Just a quick question. If the city were to move forward with this transition after tonight's vote, who pays the severance for the RCMP members?
Mr. Manuel.
So no RCMP members would lose their job as a result of the transition. Therefore, there is no severance costs associated.
Okay, actually, the reason I asked that is just over the weekend I came across an expense that Surrey, BC didn't take into account, and that they would have to pay those severance costs to the RCMP. So, yeah, just looking for clarity there.
Mr. Manuel.
So that expense related to the city of Surrey is actually not related to the severance of RCMP officers. If the city of Surrey decides to proceed with abandoning their startup of a municipal police service, the collective agreement to which the city of Surrey ultimately ratified included a severance for the municipal police officers. So if they decide to retain the RCMP, they have severance requirements to those municipal police officers. If they proceed with the transition as they had initially started out, there's no severance to the RCMP.
Okay, so thanks for that answer. Actually, it's sort of I was leading you in there, but so essentially, like tonight, there's a no going back unless we want a big bill.
Go ahead, Mr. Manuel.
So I would never say that a decision is final, but there is consequences to reversing. And as we've seen play out in other communities, there's a number of disadvantages behind wavering back and forth. I would suggest the most prudent action is to proceed whichever way it goes and to stand by that decision. The one thing that is important to note, though, is, as I indicated, the severance was not forced upon the city of Surrey. It was a freely negotiated collective agreement to which was ratified by Surrey City Council.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. That's fine. I can leave it for tonight. Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you. I do want to go back to Public Safety Canada and the various negotiations that have to happen if we transition. And I'm not worried about the operational negotiations about information sharing, things like that. That's too in the weeds for us. And I'm very confident about public safety through any transition. But I am curious about the financial implications of that. On a financial basis, what are the things that might be in question pending those negotiations?
So ultimately, one of the things that triggered challenges in other transitions has been the effective drawdown of the existing policing resources. So there was intentful consideration to the processes and mechanisms that exist for the city via contract to execute its rights in that regard, in conjunction, again, with the province, who has primary responsibility for ensuring that adequate policing is provided to the community. And obviously, Public Safety Canada has a similar interest in making sure that adequate policing is provided to the community. One of the mechanisms that can be utilized is on an annual basis, the city is able to inform the RCMP as to the number of officers we plan to fund in any given year. That is the mechanism to which you can trigger the drawdown. So, and then with the province, and this is where conversation with the province has occurred as well, if for some reason or another, the recruiting and onboarding did not occur as intended and is subsequently pushed back, there is means to which the province has at their disposal to direct provincial resources to offset those gaps.
Go ahead, Councillor Bressie.
Yeah, and at what point, say we go forward with it, and I really agree that if we go forward with it, we need to be committed to that, is the lesson learned from Surrey, but there also are always the what ifs. And At what point does it get determined, if it does get unwind, whether or not that 10% continues? The 10% that we currently get in subsidy?
So I don't have a clear answer on that. I do know that, actually, okay, sorry, let me clarify. Are you asking, will we receive the 10% through the transitional period? Or is it if we terminate and then change our minds, whether we'd continue to receive the 10%?
Yeah, I'm asking if we end up like Coaldale and we reverse.
Correct. So my understanding, and this would have to be, again, a discussion with Public Safety Canada, is that if we fully terminated the agreement and then a year or two after the agreement was terminated, we changed course, at this point, any additional new RCMP contract is void of the 10% subsidy. Frankly, all indications, if you go to Public Safety Canada's website, is that the government is intent on stopping the subsidization of that 10%.
Right, sorry, I had my one follow-up.
Thank you. Councillor Bosch.
Wow, good for you, Councillor Bressy.
Straight.
So my question is going to probably be much easier. Because we are comparing Medicine Hat in particular in a lot of ways to this transition, on their financial statements through budgeting, they're looking at a 5% increase in policing. Can you give us some information? Is that increased costs? Is that manpower? Exactly what is that for 5% over the next 5 years?
So I did see a news article pertaining to that, and it certainly appeared as though it's personnel is what's driving that cost. They have a additional police inspector as well as additional police officers and civilian support staff. Just like the city of Grande Prairie as a whole, the majority of their expenditures are salary related. The one thing to note is and maybe I'll ask MNP to weigh in on this one, Nathan, but ultimately the projections we provided across the 6 years are really intended to show the differential if everything stayed the same. We're not saying that the RCMP won't need more police officers, and we're not saying that the municipal police service wouldn't need more police officers. Simply put, if we had more police officers, the differential would just increase or decrease accordingly.
And in regards to staffing costs, the cost to have boots on the ground is between 80 and 85% of the total cost is staffing?
I can take our actual numbers and get you an exact percentage for this afternoon, but my understanding of it historically is that's roughly where it sits.
Thank you.
Councillor Berg.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Clayton. So one of the common questions that we're asked is, on the backside of this, are my taxes going to go up? And I know that we've discussed, and it's in the MNP report, that by switching, we will have savings of approximately $1 million. So how confident are you to citizens that our taxes will not go up? Now, again, saying that, they could stay the same, they may reduce, but again, everyone around the council table also pays taxes. We don't want to see taxes go up. How confidently can you assure us that they won't go up?
Mr. Manuel.
So what I can say is that the projected operating budget come year 6, when the municipal police service is operating, does project out to have it's actually approximately, with some adjustments that were made, a differential of just under $800,000 a year. That's not to say that there won't be some expenditures in addition to that. I mean, as through this process and depending on the level of service and those sorts of things that council ultimately wants the police service to provide, I'm confident to say I don't believe we will spend an additional $800,000 a year over what is projected today. If we spend less than the $800,000 a year, there is no ongoing tax implication.
Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much. So tonight's the night that we're going to make a decision. Whatever way it goes, let's say it goes that we do go ahead with the municipal police force. When do we start spending money to get we need to get a commission started, and then we need to get a police chief. So can you give me some kind of a timeline?
So if the decision's made to go, essentially the intent is to continue with our project team, which you're pretty much looking at the moment, and scale that up to bring in additional resources starting within April. One of the first actions would be recruiting the executive director for the police commission and commencing the recruitment activities for commission members. Following that, the chief of police would ultimately be hired, and later this year, the chief of police would form their initial staffing complement, which is about an additional 6 more senior positions. So through the course of the remainder of the year, you would essentially see the commission established, you would see the chief hired, you would see the recruiting activities commence for the broader future recruitment activities, as well as the corporate services functions such as the regulatory issues related to the MOUs, tri-party agreements, so on, that were identified. So that's really the next year's worth of activities.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Platt.
Thanks, Mayor Clayton. Just to go back to Councillor Berg's question, and that's it's such a complex report, and I get the feeling from speaking to mayors in the community, it's just been really hard to dissect and really dive into. I'm just wondering if there's a one-pager or something that can be produced, because the misconception I'm having with people is, so we're losing 10% subsidies, we're going to pay more, and yet we're saying it's going to be cheaper. And so is there a way that we can articulate, and again, I know it's hard, even myself, of going through those reports, it's really hard to really get to the root of that. If we were to go ahead with this tonight, is there a way that we can show that case to the community and with that information? Because I think there's a lot of misinformation from what I'm talking to people out there about that. But I'm just wondering if there's a nice one-pager that could actually articulate that to kind of build people's trust in the community that this has been looked at. We're confident in this decision, but here's how the numbers actually work.
Yeah, I'll just circle back to Nathan over at MNP, but I believe between the two of us, Nathan, we have an idea, a good idea, as to where the differences exist and where some cost savings have occurred, particularly in divisional admin. Nathan, do you think that's something that's achievable?
Mr. Martins? And then, sorry, before you go, Mr. Martin, our CAO had a comment. Mr. Nicolay?
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. And it's a really, really good question, Councillor Plott, and I'm hearing it as well from a lot of people and from the community. And just as I've been listening today to where the questions are coming from a financial point of view, I sketched out a little municipal police service over-under chart. So where is it that costs are going to escalate if we go to a municipal service? Because there are some. It was your comment that we have to make sure we're not being utopian about the way we look at the future. There are some areas where we're going to see increased costs, and there's some areas where we're going to see decreased costs. So at a macro level, could we identify the half dozen areas where costs are going to go up, and by about what magnitude? And the half dozen areas where costs are going to go down, and by about what magnitude, and net that out in a simple, easy to digest depiction of over-under. And similarly, I know we're not talking about service quality here, but really from council's perspective, the primary driver here was to get a more community sensitive, more community accountable police service into Grande Prairie. And there are similar ways in which we've measured enhancements to service quality and areas in which the RCMP provide impeccable service quality that won't be the same. we could do the same over under and net that out and be able to demonstrate at a high level why we feel that there's a financial advantage and why we feel that there's a quality advantage.
Okay, that would be great. I think a big gap in all this is just it's a lot to take in for people. It's a big education component for people. So if we can streamline that to build confidence with individuals in our community, I think that would go a long way in this transition if we choose to move ahead.
Thanks for your comments, Councillor Plott. So you took yourself right back in. No, that's okay. You're playing properly. I appreciate you following the rules. Councillor Blackmore.
When we look at the number of officers moving in and out, there's going to be a period of time when we'll have more staff rather than less staff. I am curious if there's going to be any financial implications to where those staff members work from. So we have one RCMP detachment that is tight for space right now, and my understanding is the plan is still to move enforcement to the site formerly known as the Stonebridge.
Mr. Manuel.
Correct, and we also have plans to move some RCMP units within that facility as well as if we were to proceed, that's the likely location of the transition team as well. So ultimately, we do have the facilities available to accommodate everybody through the transition.
And if I could ask my follow-up question, this question is actually for our Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Whiteway. When the time comes that we will need to expand physical space, we have a process for doing that in the city. And could you just quickly tell us where we can expect those dollars to come from in the future?
Thank you, through the mayor. So like any significant capital project, it would come forward through the budget process and would get funded. So historically, many maybe larger expansions or even new builds would be debt funded, or that decision would be made at that time.
And it's not related to this budget at all because it's in the future.
Correct, yes.
Councillor Bosch.
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. Can I ask a question just on Councillor Blackmore's question, then my question?
Sure, and actually, I apologize. Mr. Martins, I know I missed you after the CAO went. Did you have anything to add on that subject previously?
Thank you. My only comment to add is that when we do the breakdown, we'll be looking at a year 6 scenario as far as the regular operating. If we're looking at interim years 1 to 5, then you're going to get a breakdown of the duplicate costs in there. So for clarity's sake, I think if we're putting that one pager, we'd likely be looking at a year 6 scenario of with inflation projected, what would be your over-under scenario of municipal versus RCMP projections.
Great, thanks. Good point. Councillor Bosch.
Thank you. So for the facility renewal, potentially a new building in the future, do we not already have a budget line or a facility renewal stream where all of our infrastructure is, calculated and coordinated for replacement?
Ms. Whiteway.
Thank you, through the mayor. We do have a facility renewal reserve, correct? It does not include to replace all city buildings. So it more would be for improvements or proactive repairs, those sorts of things, more of the significant nature. But no, it does not anticipate any sort of replacement of all city buildings.
Okay.
To add to that, Ms. Whiteway, is that because traditionally significant capital investments are in a municipal world, or we look to borrow to build significant capital infrastructure rather than use reserves?
Correct. Thank you, Mayor Clayton. So the idea always being that a significant investment like a new building would span over many years. And so the idea with borrowing and having that through the budget for the life of the building would allow for multiple years of taxpayers to be able to contribute to it.
the idea that it's associated to the years of people using it, as opposed to us paying for the future use.
Perfect, thank you. So my question in regards to finances in this potential stream of municipal policing, the commission cost you have at 50,000, roughly. Is that right? Or up to the ED cost is in there, right?
Mr. Manuel?
So we don't specifically have commission costs separated out within the budget, but what we do have is we have essentially the cost and operating expenses associated to the executive director, which is going to be north of $140,000 a year. Plus we have additional professional services budget to assist with the third-party legal training, essentially engage in legal to help assist with training commission members and their responsibilities. We also benefit from the fact that the province has resources as well that because they regulate commissions, they are keen on ensuring they know their responsibilities. So ultimately, for comparison purposes, the City of Medicine Hat and its police commission have an annual budget this year of $70,000. And obviously, we greatly exceed that, but we also recognize that there's more complexity involved with the startup and transition. So it makes sense to have that full-time resource. And additionally, there is some runway to get commission members familiar with that operation, because we will not be the operational police service for at least 3 years. So we will have commission responsibilities as it pertains to developing policy and procedure and approving that on behalf of both the commission and the chief of police. However, the operational requirements that come with being the commission are future state.
So my follow-up to that is, because this would be a whole new program for us, policies and procedures would be essential in regards to the understanding of a municipal force from other areas. So gaining our expertise in this local area might be a bit difficult. So that we may have to draw from, province-wide, outside of the province. There's a cost to that, though. And so that's why I ask, is there additional costs to the commission piece, especially in the beginning?
So I think ultimately, like I indicate, I think we've covered that off. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 allocated to the commission when fully operational commissions for a similar size police service are operating at $70,000. With that said, it's important to note that the responsibilities and the requirements of a commission are heavily prescribed. There's not a lot of freelancing available. And as it pertains to like their policies and procedures and those things, it's largely template based. There's not a lot of deviation that's permitted to occur. And I have full confidence that we will be able to recruit and train a functioning commission. And there will be opportunities for professional development within the budget that's provided to them. There is an organization in Alberta called the Alberta Police Governance Association, which consists of the province's various policing committees and commissions. And they offer at least annual training opportunities and sometimes more frequently than that. Further to that, something that should be noted by council is recent amendments to the Police Act that occurred back in December will now require the city to form a policing committee. So any jurisdiction with more than 15,000 people in Alberta that's policed by the RCMP is going to be mandated to have a policing committee. A policing committee has several of this responsibility of the policing commissions, and there would be a similar need to have a budget for that group, which is not presently allocated. So by having a commission, they're able to perform both tasks of the policing committee and the police commission. If we stay with the status quo, there will be a budgetary impact of having the policing committee, which isn't presently accounted for.
Thank you.
I'm just going to ask a question on that vein, and then I had another question. Mr. Manuel, can you tell me, following Councillor Bosch's comments, where in the budget, remind me where it's allocated for recruitment of the commission? I know that we've talked about using a third-party independent recruitment executive type search firm. Is it in that line of of the commission, or is it in another part?
So again, we don't have a specific line for the commission.
Right.
It's part of an overall startup and transition. Okay. However, the two spots that stand out for me are both the recruitment line item we have for startup, as well as professional services.
Okay. And my second question, hang on, it'll come back to me. I've lost it. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Clayton, and thanks, Councillor Bosch, for saving me a question. I did have one of that. So, in the report, we reference several times how we'll be able to draw upon city staff and city experiences, whether it's HR or marketing or those things. I'm just wondering if we've done any numbers on a true cost accounting on what that's going to cost the city. And I guess my fear longer term is we end up hiring another HR person inside the city, but it's actually for the RCM, for our municipal police force. Or we end up having a bunch of work going to our marketing department or our comms department that's actually great, but it's being used for our municipal police service. So is there anywhere in the report that we've allocated money of an in and out to, I've always believed I would love to go towards a true cost accounting system. And I know that's not the will, but I'm just concerned that we just might have some ability here where we just think things are going to be done off the side of a municipal desk for a municipal service, and then it ends up costing us operational expenses later on through comms and marketing and HR and IT and all these other areas. So can you just speak to that to give me a little more confidence that that's not going to happen, or if maybe we've got a mechanism built back in of a cross charge back to the municipality of the city versus municipal police governance?
Manuel?
Yeah, so great question, and the answer is yes, we've added additional staff in, and I'll just cover it off right now, for instance. So immediately, if the decision is to proceed, the first positions that will be hired to first augment the municipal police transition team and ultimately roll in to be the future first employees of the police service itself is really a finance manager position, finance coordinator, a human resources, we call them consultants in the city, but it's our lead human resources role specific for the police service, as well as over the course of initially with the startup, we have a dedicated IT person because we don't scale up for a few years. We add positions over time, but we ultimately land with 6 dedicated IT resources. We have the addition, did I mention communications? We got communications resource that would start in April as well, dedicated comms. We have additional dispatchers that have been put into the budget. So ultimately what we've done is reach out to those corporate services functions you're referring to, HR, finance, and we look at, okay, we're adding 100 bodies. What's the scope of work associated with those 100 bodies? And are we providing the sufficient additional capacity to the city to provide that service? And that's what's been incorporated into the budget. I'll let Mr. Martins just confirm that they've been placed across their respective years.
I also see that Ms. Nahorniak had a comment in regards to that. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to, sorry, Nathan, you can go ahead if you want.
Go ahead, Sartina.
Okay. I was just going to add to what Mr. Manuel said and just touch on that we do have a line in the transition report as well. Under the risk assessment category, that is identified as a risk, and we have went through and assessed it and identified some mitigation strategies as well, which Chris did touch on.
Further to that as well, too, I think the staffing that Mr. Manuel had referenced as well, those items have been allocated appropriately across the years as we've seen the staffing increase across the ramp up of the service. And as Mr. Manuel had noted, it's only the 100 officers, which is really going to be the primary additional workload or staffing that's being added, whereas the other support civilian staff are already part of the city service, and those are already being supported by the existing city services. So that's not an additional burden on those departments. It's really just the 100 officers that are the primary addition, along with a couple of those few other civilian positions which we've added to.
If I can just, so if I understand correctly, we've considered this. It's baked into this transition into the budget, and those bodies are some of the 100 in, 100 out over the course of the series of time as we transition across.
Yeah, they're separate than the one. Sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Martin.
Thank you. This is actually, we've had a lot of conversations, and I know MNP has really had that same question as well when we first started on this exercise, and we've had a lot of conversations on the financial side, and we feel confident that what the city has in place and the resources that have been allocated will be sufficient to meet the need.
And so they're part of, and this is where I'm just trying to figure out the body part. Are they part of the 100 in, 100 out bodies, or is this additional bodies on top of the 100 members switching across the municipal?
In addition to the 100.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's built into the other staffing line items based on whether it's civilian or, so the civilian staffing is built into the civilian line on the budget.
I had a question. Sorry. You're okay. Yeah, I had a question. I understand, Mr. Manuel, that in a municipal police force, there's an opportunity for a volunteer team that is not recognized with the RCMP currently. Was there any financial savings actualized through the work of a community volunteer RCMP support team that potentially other municipalities have seen? If no, that's fine. I'm just curious.
I wouldn't say financially. What I would say is supplemental resourcing.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's certainly, we've seen a variety of models from auxiliary officers to Lethbridge has a program called The Watch. It's kind of like a light version of MOP.
Okay.
Those opportunities exist. I don't think they exist to reduce police expenditure. I think they exist more just to enhance capacity service delivery.
Yeah, you bet. Perfect. Thank you. Councillor Bosch.
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. This goes back to, I don't know, probably a couple hours ago, when we were talking insurance. My question is, if knowing how insurance works for, commercial, private, once you claim, and RCMP are being sued all the time for various different reasons, so we will be going through the process of being sued or potentially sued. What happens to the insurance rates once we've, poke the bear, essentially? So once we've used some of the certain amount of times, whether you get one freebie or three freebies, I'm not sure what the stats are on that, but what is the increase in insurance rates thereafter?
So it's my understanding that the insurance quote was not a loss leader quote. It was really assessed around what are the insurance requirements of similar size. The insurance provider is a municipal government insurance provider, and they know what the risk profile is in consideration of those other communities. The specific impacts, it's outside my area of expertise, and I can't weigh in specifically on that. One thing that we did learn is this was an area of significant initial concern for our team, just because it's an area we weren't as familiar with. But as we toured around to these other municipalities, we found that the experience of the mid-sized cities we were going to was frankly fairly negligible in this area, in that most of those communities used the example that they pay more claims for potholes than they do for police liability. So it didn't end up being what we anticipated it could be.
And to be clear, we don't pay a lot of insurance claims on potholes. Just so everybody.
So I guess for me, I'm still at that beginning level where you once were when you were first researching this. So I personally would like to know what that may look like or examples of it in the future, maybe not right at this moment, but sometime today. Because I do think, I talk to people who own restaurants, and since COVID, their increase in insurance has skyrocketed. So I don't think it's something that we should just blow off. You might be comfortable with it, but again, I'm at the early stage where you once were.
Yeah, and ultimately, I'll defer to the city manager and how best the city can respond to that question. It really is outside of my wheelhouse.
Mr. Nicolay, anything to add?
I'll elaborate this afternoon if you want to give the team a chance to ruminate on this a little bit. But we did go to the insurer, and the insurer is used to insuring municipal police services. We talked to all of the other municipal police services about their experiences. And it's a bit of a misconception that the RCMP are being sued all the time. The cost of insurance that the RCMP or municipal police service are being quoted anticipates a certain claims frequency and claims depth, and it's built into the cost that they're giving you. So the cost that's in this budget is a cost that was given to us directly by the city's insurers. He looked at the current carrier, looked at our current coverage, and looked at the incremental cost of adding this peril, and factored in the experience rating that occurs in insurance experiences, claims experiences in local municipal police services. And that's what's in there. Could it go up? Could it be? It will be a variable for us going forward to predict what 3 negligence cases that were covered within insured perils under an existing coverage might be, to predict what that might do to an insurance premium 3 or 4 years out will be a very speculative exercise. So on weighing the over-unders, for example, one of the things that the city is now taking on is the responsibility to insure a municipal police service. And we take comfort in knowing that, as has 80% of the the policed communities in Canada, either through local police services or provincial police services, they're done in exactly the same way that the city of Grande Prairie is contemplating.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Clayton. I'm getting there. I'm sorry we're not making noon, but I'm just curious on the overtime side. When we met with the superintendent and talking to the superintendent afterwards, he had mentioned how they have to have a certain amount of members on call at any given time. And that drove up their overtime quite substantially. As we're looking at a body in, body out, are we confident that we've captured enough overtime to be in that same position where, through sick leave, things that pop up, that we're going to be able to have a minimum amount of call service availability at any given time?
So absolutely, we've considered the operational coverages as a start point for us on this. We took what's presently spent on overtime under the RCMP model and carried that over and then added enhancement to it.
Okay, so we're really comfortable that we're going to have the overtime covered with both models.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Bosch.
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. My question is in regards to complaints and major crime investigations through ACERT. Currently, is there a cost to us regarding ACERT? And then additionally, this new complaints committee that's going to be set up provincially, ACERT Light, I like to call it. What is the cost to that?
Mr. Newton?
Yeah, if I may. So in relation to your first question, yes, the municipal service will be subject to the jurisdiction of ACERT under certain incidents, so the notifications. There's no cost passed to the police service for ACERT investigations. The Police Review Committee, which is the new entity that's been created under the Police Amendment Act, that's yet to be determined between the province and the chiefs of police around what those costs may be. Passed back to police services. So that dialogue between the chiefs of police services in Alberta and the provincial government is still ongoing, to my knowledge, and I don't believe they've fallen on an agreed resolution as to what that cost matrix will be.
So you're saying that whether it's RCMP based or municipal force based, that cost will potentially be there for both sides?
For all municipal police services, yes. I believe the discussions are still ongoing as to what jurisdiction that new oversight, the Police Review Commission, will have over the RCMP. So I think until those discussions are concluded, it'd be hard to say what, if any, financial implications there would be to the RCMP.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bressy, is it on this vein? If not, I have a question. Okay. Can you tell me, Mr. Manuel, or possibly our consultants from MMP, what percentage of the transition cost is a duplication of services and what percentage is other costs associated with implementing municipal? And if you can't, you can come back to me later. I'll ask it again tonight.
I suspect we're going to have to come back on that. Where the duplication is going to be on staffing dollars allocated to certain positions. So we should be able to figure it out.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Bressy.
Something one specific service that we'd hope to enhance with this is having dispatch go from Edmonton to being local dispatch. I have had some point out that dispatch is available in other communities. Do you have local dispatch for RCMP? Is that possible under the RCMP model? And if so, would that be included in our current costs, or would we have to? What would that take?
So ultimately, that is correct. Strathcona County, St. Albert, Lloydminster, and I believe even the city of Red Deer now are doing their own, what they call OCC, for municipal component of their RCMP detachments. We are able to do that as the city of Grande Prairie, and frankly, I think they would welcome us doing it. That would be in addition, those would be costs borne by the municipality. Those staff are municipal employees. That would come at the 100% cost recovery piece and would need to be in addition to the existing budget. The dispatch model that's built into the proposed municipal service is within the existing budget.
All right. I can say that I see no one else in the queue. I want to remind council there is still a council meeting ahead this afternoon. There are delegations in the evening portion, as well as the item of police transition is on the evening portion, where there's delegations there as well. I know there will be many more questions as we continue this consideration. I want to thank the external candidates from MMP for joining us today. Appreciate you being able to join us to provide context and additional information. I think it goes to show that MMP has been very engaged in this consultation, and as a national accounting firm, really a great tool and a resource for us. So thank you for your time today. In the room, I want to thank Mr. Newton and Mr. Manuel for your wherewithal with the questions from council. It's extremely important information, and I look forward to further questions and conversation this afternoon. So for now, this meeting is adjourned, and we'll see you at 3 o'clock today. Thank you.